So one day I ordered that Tik Tok apple juice stuff because all I could find in the store were these glass bottles that didn't crunch. They tasted good, but no crunch. Now we're going to find out if it's actually real. Ready?
What? Wait.
And we both just sat there in amazement, and then I compared it to a real apple. And it sounded more like an apple than an apple.
Haha, and you thought it was editing.
Then I threw the real apple and ran off yelling. So one day I decided to cartwheel across America. Well, like half of America. I cartwheeled way out of my neighborhood and on down into Arkansas, where I cartwheeled for quite a while until I made it to Mississippi, where I also cartwheeled for a while, but not quite as long, and then on up into Alabama, and then from there, clear on up into Florida, where my cartwheeling eventually got pretty bad. But the point is, I kept going clear on out to the ocean, and on into the water. Yeah. So one day I took a Power Wheels to a fast food place. I got in and drove on up after a lot of struggle. And then I pressed the button to order my food.
I would like a corn dog and a large tot. All right, thank you.
Then a car drove by and said,
500. Thank you. My daddy bought it.
I then sat there, waved at the camera, then played with all the car's buttons. And eventually my food came.
A corn dog and then a large tot.
Yep.
All
All right, thank you much.
Good rest of your day.
You too. Thank you.
Then I drove away with my food, and I think this is going to become my new go-to vehicle. And it was a good corn dog. So one day I went to Walmart to get a bunch of bars of soap to make one of those satisfying soap videos. I went home, opened up one of the bars of soap, and got to cutting it. And it was actually working and looked so satisfying. It would just curl up and be a little strand. And then I cut it into a brick shape and cut all that, which was really cool. Next up was the green bar, and it was also really cool. So I made it into a brick also, and it was even cooler than the other one. A bunch of tiny stuff just scraped off. And next up was the dove, and I about chopped my finger off because it was so hard to cut. Then I mutilated this bar and totally didn't fake this knife throw. Whoa! Yeah. So one day I ran outside and saw a watermelon, so I ran to it. I picked it up and then ran it back to my house to open it up the only way I knew how, with rubber bands. I put some rubber bands on it, and then I got a sheet for when it breaks. And then I continued placing rubber bands on it with the help of my brother, and it was starting to actually work. I kept doing it, and then my brother drew a face on it.
Henry!
And then we just kept going until eventually we ran out of good rubber bands. So I was left with no choice but to run out in the rain, get in my car, and drive to Walmart. I got there, got my rubber bands, and then headed back home to get back to placing them. And eventually I could even see the indentation in the watermelon. And then I actually predicted it.
It's gonna bust.
When?
Any second.
Oh, God.
I just know it.
Instant replay. And it left this wad of rubber bands, like for me to turn it into a rubber band ball, part 2. Part 2, putting rubber bands on a watermelon. So it exploded and left us with this wad of rubber bands. So I decided to turn it into a rubber band ball with all the leftover rubber bands. I began by making the wad a lot neater, and I discovered this.
There's watermelon inside this.
So I did my best to get it out and then kept making it neater, and then eventually started placing actual rubber bands on it. And after a while, I took a break to go shoot some hoops with it. And let's just say it's not a basketball, and I ended up breaking my backboard more than it was already. And then I waited till the next day at like 2 in the morning to start trying to place more rubber bands on it. I finished my pile and started placing another bag, and eventually I was down to the last one. And to be honest, it was a lot of time for very little difference, but I got another bag anyway and started placing them. I finished it up and I had a ball, I guess. Let me know if I should even keep doing this. So one day I went to the clearance aisle of Walmart to look for random stuff to buy, and I found this pair of hover shoes. And I wanted to hover, so I got them. I opened them up and they looked kind of used. But I still got on them and tried to ride, but failed at first and eventually got the hang of it. And they didn't actually hover and were basically like a hoverboard in 2 separate pieces. It kind of reminded me of roller skating. I also tried to stand on one foot and failed. Then I spun around and drove backwards. Then my brother tried them and failed at first, but eventually got the hang of them, kinda. Pretty neat. So one day I got a package, so I took it upstairs, sat it down, and opened it up. And it was the Mighty Mug I ordered. This cup is designed to never spill. I put some bang in it to test it out, and it still knocked over after I hit it, and threw a rubber band ball at it, and even placed it on the wall. So I took it to a different surface and it worked. The cup would not knock over at all. So I started punching it. And when that failed, I tackled it and tackled it again. And after that, I placed it in the middle of the road and then ran it over with my hoverboard. And then I threw a basketball at it. And let's just say the mighty mug wasn't looking so mighty anymore. I took a drink of it and then I threw it on the ground and walked off like a boss. Puh. Part 3 of making a rubber band ball. So this watermelon exploded and left us with this wad of rubber bands. So I turned it into this actual rubber band ball, and now we're here and I'm out of rubber bands, so I went to Walmart. I got some rubber bands and then went home and emptied them out and opened up a bag. And got busy. But after a little bit I left and then came back the next day and finished off the pile. And then I dumped out 2 more bags and started placing them. But I got bored and ended up leaving and coming back again the next day to finish it all off. I placed rubber bands forever and then I went outside to test it out on my broken hoop. Yeah, it was hard to play with, but it bounced really high. Here's it next to a basketball. Yeah. After that, I went back inside to finish off the pile, and then I dumped out another 2 bags and started placing rubber bands for what felt like an eternity. And I was finally down to the last bag. I put them all on, and I was done. And it's pretty big, but it's going to take like 1,000,000 likes for me to keep going. So one day, my family and I rented these cool scoot cars. I got in the green one, revved it up, and then took off. And traffic was kind of slow, so I stopped and beeped at a yellow one I saw. And then continued on down the coast. And my brother didn't like my driving that much, but I thought it was great. And we eventually made it to this curve thing where I raced my dad round and around. It was pretty hard to turn though, and I almost hit the curb. And my dad did hit the curb. Then I decided to ride passenger and just enjoy the ride and the view. And I saw a helicopter. Then we pulled up to this ice cream place where I got out and waited for my brother. Then went in and got ice cream that they actually rolled up and put into a cup and then handed to me. And it was pretty good. I then switched to the red car and drove out to a gas station where I filled it up and then drove it back. So one day I ordered a human-sized hamster ball to run in the creek with. I took it outside, unboxed it, and unfolded it. I then plugged the air pump in and turned it on. And while it was filling up, I pulled all the folds out to make sure it filled up all the way. It was done, and I rolled it out to the grass and unzipped it, and all the air came out.
Air pump.
Yeah, I felt pretty dumb, but then I took it to my brother's truck to take to the creek. We got there, and I drank the Bang to have energy like a hamster. I got in the ball, and my brother started filling it up. It was pretty neat from the inside, and I liked the air. And then it was done, and I ran towards the creek.
Follow you.
I got in the water.
Whoa!
Like for part 2. Part 4 of making a rubber band ball. So this watermelon exploded and left us with this wad of rubber bands, and I've been adding a lot of rubber bands to it. And I said it would take 1,000,000 likes for me to keep going, and it got 4,000,000. So I went to Walmart, got more rubber bands, and then left, went home, set them down, and opened them up. And then the next day I got on that rubber band grind, placing the entire pile on the ball. And when I was done, I left and came back again later to place another bag on. And once I finished that ball, it was pretty big, like the size of my head. I weighed it, and it weighed 5 pounds. And it also bounced pretty high, and made a decent basketball for my broken hoop. And after that, my brother wanted to play some bands, so I let him. But he gave up, and I ended up having to finish his pile off. And after that, I only had one more big pile left, so I dumped it all out and started placing them. I finished it up, and then started on the bag of thicker rubber bands. And now I'm out. This sucked a lot, and since the last post got like 4,000,000 likes, it's going to take like 5,000,000 likes now for me to keep going. So one day I was just scrolling through TikTok, and I kept seeing this apple bottle trend. So I drove to Walmart and went to the juice aisle to look for it. But there was none. So I left and went to a nearby Dollar Tree to look. And there was none there either. So I left and went to Target to look. And all they had were these big bottles that didn't crunch like an apple at all. And I bought the bottle I bit because germs. And then left, went home, and then went back to Walmart the next day to look again. And then to a neighborhood market that had them, or so I thought. I took them home, opened one up, and then bit into it. And it wouldn't crunch. That doesn't sound like an apple. I had got the glass bottles, but I drank it anyway, and it was pretty good, so I just kept drinking it. So one day I decided to prank my brother with fake spray paint on his truck. But I needed more, so I went to Walmart and got some. And then I started with the blue, just writing a bunch of random stuff and scribbling. And when I was out of that, I got to the orange, writing a bunch more random junk. And when I ran out of that, this side was pretty much done, so I switched over to the next side and finished it. And go ahead and like the video since I'm not making you wait for the reaction. And here it is.
This is a joke, right? What'd you do?
What'd you do?
This is fake, right?
It's real, bro.
This is real spray paint.
And when he touched it, I think he realized it was fake, so we pulled it out to the cul-de-sac and washed it. And then he tried to spray me. Yeah. Part 5 of making a giant rubber band ball. So I've been making this rubber band ball, and I ran out of rubber bands, so I went to Walmart. Got a bunch more rubber bands, and then I went home, dumped 2 bags out, put some gloves on so I didn't break my skin again, and started placing the bands. And then left and came back the next day to finish off the pile. It looked pretty good so far, and then I forgot to video placing a whole nother bag. But it looks like this, and then I dumped out all the colored rubber bands and started placing them all on the rubber band ball. And I was done, and it was almost the size of my head and weighed 8.2 pounds. And bounced pretty high. And also made a decent basketball, like if you want me to keep going. So one day I went to the party store and got a bunch of giant balloons and a helium tank. And then went home to see what I could make fly away. I already had 2 blown up. I blew up the first red one, tied it, and then I blew up the second blue one and tied it. And now I had 4 balloons. And then I twisted and taped all the strings together and tried to lift up a weight, but it failed. So then I tried an apple. And it worked. After that, I had an idea to tie a box to the strings and send something away. I trimmed up the box and forgot the 4th balloon. So I tied it on and then went outside. And taped a Tesla Hot Wheel to the box and tried to send it to space. And it went down, so I ripped off some cardboard and it still failed. I ripped off some more and it went to my roof, then fell off. I let it go a final time and it took off and left on into space. So as you know, I have this giant rubber band ball, but now I want to make a little rubber band ball to show you how. I first wadded up a clump of bands and then wrapped them around each other until I had this. And then I started doubling up bands and adding them to the clump for a while until I had this. And after that, I just kept on going until I got to this. And it's pretty neat and bouncy. I went on for quite a while after this until it looked like this. And it's pretty cool and weighs a lot less than my other one, weighing 0, and this one weighing 28. And it's not even close to the size of my head. Here's me throwing the big one, and now here's me throwing the small one. Now a basket with the small one, a basket with the big one, eventually. And throwing the big one and throwing the small one. I had to run after it. Yeah, they're both pretty cool. So I've been making this giant rubber band ball and it now weighs 8.2 pounds, but I want it bigger, so I went to Walmart, got a bunch more rubber bands, then went home, dumped them out, put some gloves on, then emptied out 2 bags of colored rubber bands, and got busy placing the entire pile. And after I finished the colored rubber bands, I dumped out 3 bags of normal rubber bands and placed that. I placed a bunch, but then left and came back the next day to place some more. It got tiring and I placed a lot of rubber bands, so I left, took another break and came back and started on it again. I was sure to place the whole bag this time, but I got too tired and had to leave and come back again the next day to finish it off. So that's what I did, and I finished it up. And it was done. It weighed 10 pounds, was bigger than my head, and bounced pretty high. Like if you want me to keep going. So one day I decided to fill up a giant hamster ball with ball pit balls in it up with water. So I got in, let it air up, and then began filling it up with water. The water shocked me at first, and then I just let it fill up and stopped it before it got too heavy. I then laid in it for a second. It was pretty cool. And then I got up and went off, and fell pretty hard. And after that, I got up and fell again. But I went out, and then decided to lay down and put my face underwater. Then I just chilled in it. Pretty nice. I walked around for a bit, went out into the yard, slid in the balls, and then did a cannonball. And after all that, I decided to get out. Let me know what else I should do with it. So one day I wanted to see what all I could destroy from dropping my band ball up high. So I went to Walmart, got a chair, a Hot Wheel, a lot of Diet Coke, a container, and a watermelon. Then I went home, set up a ladder, and dropped the Diet Coke, and it did nothing. So I threw it, and then I dropped the band ball in another bottle. And when that failed, I shook it up and did it again. And it worked. And then my brother threw me one that I dropped. And after that, I decided to crush the Hot Wheel, and it held up pretty well. And then I dropped the 21-pound ball on the bin, and it did the most damage so far. But not enough. And after that was this tiny chair thing that got kind of broken, and I fell. Next, we dropped it on a water gun, and a piece came off. Then I shook the rest of the Diet Coke up and knocked them over, and then threw them all, one by one. And all this destroying was a lot like this game I've been playing where you drop and smash random stuff. Click the link in my bio if you want to download it. And lastly was the watermelon, and it got crushed. And I even ate some. Part 7 of making a rubber band ball. So I've been making this ball, and it's pretty giant now and weighs 10 pounds. But I wanted it bigger, so I went to Walmart, got a bunch of colored rubber bands, then went home, dumped them out, put my gloves on, and first finished off the pile of normal rubber bands that was already on the table. And once I was done with that, I dumped out all the bags of colored rubber bands and began placing them. I did this for quite a while, and the ball was finished, and it was huge. And it now weighs 11.9 pounds and is almost the size of a basketball. And it also bounces pretty high. And I also shot it in the hoop. And now I'm officially finished with it. It looks pretty cool. So one day I wanted to see what I could cut in half with a power washer. I first got this broken ramp and it did nothing, so I got a stronger tip and it still did nothing. It also failed on ice cubes, but cut a banana clean in half. Then I got a piece of cardboard and cut it until it worked. After that, I took a piece of paper, folded it into a paper airplane, and sawed it right in half. Next, I got a plastic bottle that I ended up having to secure and cut. And it put a hole in the bottle. And next I tried a can and it did nothing until I went to pick it up. Next I tried a plastic ball, failed, and a tennis ball, which actually kind of worked. It took like all the fuzz off, and at the end, it was pretty mutilated. Then I decided to do my foot. Psych. So one day I got an angle grinder and some paper to see what I could cut with paper. I glued 2 sheets together, cut it into a circle, and then I made the hole. After that I screwed it onto the angle grinder, picked up some fruit, plugged it in, and then I turned it on and began cutting on the banana. And so far it was working. So I kept going, cutting further and further into the banana until eventually I'd cut the banana completely in half. So then I started in on the grapefruit, but my blade was too broken. So I made a new one, screwed it on, plugged it in, and tried to cut the cereal box. But the blade flew off. So I made another one. Then I screwed it on, plugged it in, but the blade just flew off too. So I got mad, slammed the bucket, and then I walked off into a tree. So I've been making this giant rubber band ball, and it now weighs 11.9 pounds and is the size of a basketball. And I was gonna stop, but everyone wanted me to keep going, so I went to Walmart, got some more bands, then went home, dumped them out, put some gloves on, and got back at it. I started by placing the pile of colored rubber bands because it's easier to place, and once I was done with that, I weighed it, and it was 12.9 pounds, and still bounced pretty high, and made a good basketball. Then I went to Walmart to get more colored rubber bands, but they were out, so I just got the normal ones and went home, dumped that out, and placed that entire pile. I finished it off, and it was now 13.4 pounds, and still the size of a basketball, and still bounced pretty high. Like if you want me to keep going and just see how big I can make it. So one day after getting this comment, I decided to make a potato gun. So I got out a saw and cut this PVC pipe to its measurement, and then cut the other one. And then I added primer and glue to fit the pieces on together. And then did this piece, and then that piece, and it was all together. I let the glue set overnight and then came back to put this ignition thingy in. And to be honest, I didn't really know what I was doing, so my dad helped me put it in. I glued it on and pressed the button and it worked. Then I got all the necessary stuff out, put a potato in, and put some hairspray in, and it didn't do anything. So my brother and dad helped me, and the back blew off of it, and wrecked the tree. I guess I didn't use enough glue on it. Do not try this at home, and like if I should try again. So one day I ordered a life straw that's supposed to allow you to drink any water. I opened it up, read the package, and then tried to drink with it. And it had the wrong end, but the other end wouldn't fit. So I went and got a container, dumped my drink into it, and then drank out of the wrong end again. And the straw made it taste kind of funny, so I got up and went to test it on hot tub water. And let's just say it still tasted like hot tub water. I spit it out, and then I left and went to the creek to test out the creek water. I put my straw in the water and started drinking it. And
Tastes like water.
I took another drink from the creek, and then I threw the straw around my neck and left. Rubber band ball part 9. So a lot of people don't know that it started when this watermelon exploded and left me with this wad of rubber bands. And ever since then I've just been adding on to it, and this is the entire compilation up until now. And I needed more colored rubber bands, so I went to Walmart, but they were out. So I got gas and went to a different Walmart. But they were out too, so I went to another one and they finally had some. Then I went home, dumped out a bag, and then got busy placing the entire pile of rubber bands until I was done. And then I left and came back later. I dumped out the colored rubber bands and placed that entire pile. Then I found some more rubber bands in the floor, placed those, and then placed a bag of thicker rubber bands that I also found in the floor. And I was done. It now weighs 14.7 pounds, is the size of my head, and bounces pretty high. And it's also bigger than a basketball, like if you want me to keep going. So one day I wanted to see what all I could crush with rubber bands. So I went to Walmart and got a water gun, rubber bands, some Dr. Pepper, and a jug of water. Then I left and went home. I dumped out 2 bags of rubber bands, shook up the 2-liter, and started placing a lot of rubber bands on it. And then I just decided to go throw it, because I was scared it was going to blow up. So I threw it, and It didn't do anything. So I went and I tried again. And this time, it kind of worked. And it looked like this. And after that, I started on the water jug, alternating with my brother because it was kind of tiring. And eventually, I started messing with the cap and accidentally made it come off. I was shocked. I drank some, and then I left and went inside to start on the water gun. I placed a bunch of bands on it and then realized it'd never break and left. So one day I wanted to put my giant hamster ball that's filled with ball pit balls in the creek. So I got a pull noodle and some paracord, untangled the paracord, looped it through and tied it on. And after that I went to the creek to plan it all out. And the only problem was some cows. So I went home anyway, deflated the hamster ball and put it in my brother's truck. Then I took it down to the creek, got in it, and let it air up. Psh, until it was done. And then I made my way down, over the rocks and on out into the creek, where I walked for a bit and then laid down and drank my water. And eventually my brother let go of the rope and I was off out into the current, alone in my hamster ball. Like for part 2 or watch the full video on my YouTube, Ayres. So I've been making this giant rubber band ball and it's pretty big now, but everyone wanted it bigger, so I went to Walmart to get more bands, but they were out, so I went to a different Walmart and got some. Then went home, set down a pile of bands, and got busy placing the entire thing until it was done. And then I dumped out a few more bags and first placed the bag of smaller rubber bands and then the bags of thicker rubber bands until I was done with that. And it now weighs nearly 16 pounds and still bounces pretty high, but it's hard to catch now. And it makes a decent basketball. Like if you want me to keep going. So I've been making this giant rubber band ball and people seem to never want me to stop, so I went to Walmart, got a bunch more rubber bands, and then went home to start placing them. I dumped out the little bags first and began placing all of those until I was done, which took a while. Then I left and came back later to place all of the colored rubber bands, which took even longer, but now it looks pretty. I left again and came back to place the last bag of thicker rubber bands, and it was finally done. And it now weighs 17.5 pounds, is bigger than my head, and is pretty hard to catch when you bounce it. And now it's noticeably bigger than a basketball, like if you want me to continue this ball. So one day I decided to turn my brother's truck bed into a ball pit. First I taped up this hole, and then got all the ball pit balls from my hamster ball and dumped them out into the truck. Until eventually it was done and ready to take down the road. I jumped in it, laid down, and then just chilled. Then I got a GoPro and we headed out. And it was pretty cool, just moving along through my neighborhood in a ball pit. Yeah, and I just chilled there. And then some almost came out, but I got them. I just sat there, moved some balls around, and we went all out through the neighborhood. And at one point it was pretty shaky, but for the most part, the ride was pretty chill, and I even laid down. Then we went back home, and I got out and threw my GoPro in. I put my hand in there and found it, and then we put all the balls back in the hamster ball. Like if we should do something else with all the ball pit balls. So one day I went to Walmart to get a Power Wheels, but they were too expensive, so I left and got this used Viper that needed a battery instead. I went to the battery store and got what I needed, then went home, screwed off the seat, then put the new battery in, and screwed the seat back on, and got on it, and took off. And drove down the driveway and into the road where it wouldn't move. So I gave it a little push, and then I headed for the ramp where I made a massive jump. Then I drove pretty fast down a hill, but the problem was getting back up the hill. And we ended up having to carry it, and then I put it in my car and took it out to the country to really open it up. I drove out to the road and floored it. Gone I went, and then I ended up crashing. And I got up and ran into the field, leaving behind my awesome Viper. So I've been making this giant rubber band ball, and to be honest, at this point I'll probably never stop. So I went to Walmart, got a bunch more rubber bands, then left, went home, dumped out all the colored rubber bands, and began placing them. Until I was done with the entire pile, which took a while. But I did it, then took a break and came back later to start on the pile of normal rubber bands. And I placed that entire pile covering all the colored rubber bands. So sad. Then took another break, came back and dumped out all the thicker rubber bands and began placing them until I was out. And the ball now weighs 19.2 pounds and is a lot harder to throw and way harder to make a basket with. Yeah, it's pretty big, so like if you want me to keep going. So one day I made this elephant toothpaste TikTok and it didn't really work, so I kicked it and tried again with different stuff, and that kind of failed too. So I bought even more stuff thinking I just ordered the wrong thing by accident, you know, but no, that's not it. So I tried again a week later with some more stuff, but first I was going to try it in a cup with a sample amount. And it kind of worked. So I went ahead and dumped all the stuff into the big jug to see if it would work. And it looked like it didn't, so I pretended to be a sprinkler, but then it started to overflow. And I sprayed it. So one day I wanted to make a giant paper airplane because my last one failed, so I went to Walmart, got some tape and some poster board, and then went home to start construction. I started by positioning 4 pieces together, and then I took some tape and taped them all together. Then I flipped it over and taped all the creases on that side. Next, I folded it in half, laid on it, and then unfolded it and folded all the little necessary folds in order to make the plane. I folded one side down, added some tape, and then folded the other side down and added some tape. Then I folded the plane in half and folded down one wing, and then folded down the other one. I added some more tape to it, and I was done. So I put it in my car and drove on out to a bridge to throw it off.
We went last time.
It was kind of flooded, but I threw it anyway, and it totally failed. So I went down there, over a puddle, and into the woods to go get it. I got it out of the water, and it was totally destroyed. So I've been making this giant rubber band ball, and it's getting pretty huge, and I'm probably not stopping. So I went to Walmart, got all the colored rubber bands they had, then went home, dumped out the bag of normal rubber bands, and placed that entire pile, which was kind of hard because of how big the rubber band ball is now. Then I took a couple days off and came back to place all 8 bags of colored rubber bands, which took a while, a long while, but eventually I finished, and it's huge now. It weighs 21.6 pounds and is a lot harder to throw and catch than it used to be, and almost impossible to make a basketball with, like if you want me to keep going. So one day I ordered an inflatable couch to float down the creek in. I unwrapped it and then let it air up and got on it. And then folded it into a couch and my dog got on it. Then we took it outside, put it in my brother's truck, and went to the creek. I sat by the highway and then carried it all the way down over the rocks and out to the water and out to the launching point where I pushed off. And it worked really well and was amazing. I continued on and then decided to lay down and just enjoy the ride. And then I almost ran into a tree. And I kept going out even further and waved goodbye to my brother. And before you know it, I was just gone, out of sight of anything but the GoPro. But eventually I came back and dragged it all the way back to shore, up the rocks, and into the truck, and all the way home. So one day I ordered a go-kart attachment for my hoverboard. I got all the parts out, and then I looked at the instructions and tossed them. And after that, I quickly realized I needed them, and then I started putting everything together. I finished it all up, and then strapped it to my hoverboard, and then got on it and drove out the door. I drove to the driveway, and then through a puddle, and then down the road, and I lost control. And then lost control again, and hurt myself.
You sound like a whale.
I pulled it out of the ground and the hoverboard wouldn't work anymore. So I tried to fix it by tossing it. And when that failed, I got all sad. But then I had the thought, I'll just go to Walmart and blow all my money on a new one. So I got there, pushed the button, and then took it home. And then I put my go-kart attachment on it to ride it around. I kept riding, and then I also failed on a wheelie. And then I made my way towards a hill to go down it, and ended up losing control again and going into someone's yard and then doing it again. And then the next day, the broken one worked somehow, and I wheelied it and spun on it and finally drifted out. So I've been making this rubber band ball for way longer than I thought I'd be, and I'm just gonna keep going. So I went to Walmart and they were out of rubber bands, so I left and came back a few days later and they had some. I went home, dumped them all out into a pile, and started placing them. And it's honestly just so satisfying to watch the pile go down. And when I was done, I left and came back later with a new bag that I ordered on Amazon. And the band seemed good, so I placed the entire pile until I was done. And it now weighs 23.6 pounds, is way bigger than my head, and it's really hard to throw, and even harder to make a basket with. But I made one. Like if I should keep going. So one day I wanted to hoist this giant water balloon up into this tree. So I went to Walmart and got a lot of paracord and a tarp. Then I went home and laid out the tarp and the balloon, and then I put the hose in and started filling it up. Until eventually it was big enough, and I stopped the water, took the hose out, and zip tied it. And it was pretty cool. We wrapped the tarp around it and then ran the paracord through all the holes. Then I climbed into the tree and threw the paracord over the branch as a pulley, but it was too heavy. So I unzipped it to let some water out and got in it and put my head in it. And then we let the water come out and we tried again, but failed again. So we attached the paracord to the truck and just broke the tarp. So then I let some of the water drain out and put it in a hammock and started filling it up back up again. And I sat on it and even laid on it. And then I started rocking it back and forth and it fell out. So I stood on it and then jumped on it and eventually it broke. Yeah. So sad. So one day I decided to go for a run. So I got up out of my chair and took off in my kangaroo shoes. I didn't know where, why, or how far I was going, but I just kept running. I ran all the way to the street, and when I got there, I just kept going. I just continued on running through my neighborhood, one foot after the other. And before long, I had ran all the way out to the countryside. And I just still kept running. And I just ran until I went into a ditch, you know? So I've been making this giant rubber band ball, and I'm just going to keep adding rubber bands every time Walmart restocks. So I went there, got a few more bags of colored rubber bands, then went home and started with the 2 bags I ordered on Amazon. I placed the entire pile until you couldn't see a colored rubber band in sight. And then I left and came back later to place the colored rubber bands I got at Walmart. And I placed it until I was done. It's huge and now weighs almost 26 pounds, is super hard to throw and really hard to catch, but I can still make a basket with it and even stand on it now. Well, kinda. Like if you think I should keep going. So one day I ordered this zip line to put in a tree. I opened it up and there was a lot of different random stuff I didn't know much about, so I had my dad help. We took it out and decided on what tree to put it in, and then I got some stuff, dropped a ladder, put it in the tree, and attached this thing around it. Then I tightened it and added the actual zip line to it and got some more stuff. We talked about the instructions for a bit and then looped the handlebars on and wrapped the zip line around the other tree, which took until dark to get the slack out of. So we left and came back in the morning and my dad finished tightening it up. Then I tested my weight on it, you know, for safety, and went for it. And it was pretty fun. Don't try this at home though. Then here's my brother who went after me, and he actually got pretty addicted to the zip line and went again. And here's me going without sitting on the seat. Yeah, I almost hit my feet on a lot of stuff. So as you probably know, I've been making this giant rubber band ball, and I needed more rubber bands, so I went to Walmart. But they were out of the ones I needed, so I went to a different Walmart, and they had some. Then I went home, dumped them all out, and got busy. And sped up, this all just looks really cool. Anyway, I finished that pile, and took a break and came back later to finish this bag I ordered. And sadly, it's a lot less colorful now. But I'm done, and it now weighs 28.3 pounds and bounces decently. And I also made a basket, like if I should keep going. So one day I decided to take a moped out on the highway. I took off and headed out through my neighborhood. And I took it all the way to the highway, where I floored it to a max speed of 40 in a 55. And it was so much fun, I was just living life. And eventually I turned off onto a more mild road, where I went for quite a while just driving and admiring the view. It was really pretty and pretty cool. Then I came to an intersection and turned back around and stopped, got off and got a piece of grass, then got back on my moped and took off with the piece of grass. And I went all the way back to the highway and then floored it. And I went over the bridge, but couldn't quite make it up the hill. And I think something broke, so I pulled over, stopped, and it wouldn't go. So I got off and rolled it all the way back up to my neighborhood, then got tired, so my brother did it. So I've been making this giant rubber band ball for quite a while now, and I'm out of rubber bands, so I went to Walmart, and they had so many colored rubber bands. I got them, and then went back to carry even more, and then left. I went home and started with this pack I ordered, and I placed the entire pile. And done. And then I took a break and came back later with all the colored rubber bands. I dumped them all out into a pile, which was a lot, and got busy placing them for what felt like an eternity, because this is probably the biggest pile I've ever placed. And it's huge. It now weighs 30 pounds, is way bigger than my head, is pretty hard to throw, and almost impossible to make a basket with, and I can even stand on it. Like if you think I should keep going. So one day, this local hammock guy asked me to come to this hammock stacking thing. I checked out the hammock and then went up the ladder to look at where all the hammocks would go. And after that, it was time for me to get in, and the stacking began. I got in the next hammock, and the plan was to just keep stacking until I was pretty high. And it was pretty fun up there. They added another hammock, and it was pretty high, but I got up into it. And then I got up into an even taller one. And then an even taller one after that. I got in the next one and waved at my brother. And in the next one after that, I blew my cap off. Then we added the final hammock, and I got in it. I was at the top of the world and just stared at the creek. And then I saw someone float on by like something I'd do. And after that, I had to deflect all these water balloons being thrown at me. Then while trying to get down, this lady fell, and so did this other lady. And then I fell, but I caught myself like a boss and swung on down. Then this dude did a bunch of spins in the hammock and also swung on down, pretty gracefully. I left, and they gave me a hammock, so I put it in my tree and got in. So this is part 18 of making this giant rubber band ball, and I'm just going to keep going. So I went to Walmart and got like 9 packs of colored rubber bands, then left, went home, and dumped them all out into a giant pile, and got busy placing them. And I placed the entire pile, which took quite a while. And then I left and took a break and came back later with this bag. I dumped it out and placed that entire pile. And eventually I was done. And it weighs a lot. is bigger than my head, is pretty hard to make a basket with, I can stand on it, and really hard to throw. Like if you think I should keep going. So one day I wanted to put chalk dash lines all around my neighborhood like I saw this girl on TikTok do. So I went to Walmart and got some spray chalk and some regular chalk. Then went home and tried to make a stencil out of cardboard but failed. Then I tested out some spray chalk, and after that I measured the middle of the road and marked it. Then I tied some rope to a hoverboard to try to pull me, but it failed. Then I made it longer and it still failed. So I tried walking, but that sucked, and I thought it'd be easier with some normal chalk, but it still failed. So I got out a hoverboard I thought was broken, and it worked perfectly. And when I ran out of one piece, I got a new one, and kept going all the way until the end of one side of my neighborhood. I ran out again, but kept going, and then was done. And then I went back home, got some more chalk, and went out to the other side of my neighborhood to get started. And I finished off the neighborhood and ran out of chalk. And then on the way home, my hoverboard died, so I had to carry it all the way home. And now here's driving before the lines, and here's driving after. So I'm back at it again with the rubber band ball, and I need more rubber bands again. So I went to Walmart and counted out like 12 packs of rubber bands in the floor, and then grabbed them all and went home. And I first started with the pack I ordered on Amazon to match the surface of the ball, and after I was done with that, I took a break and came back later to place all the colored rubber bands. I dumped them all out into a pile, which was a lot, and then began placing them for quite a while until I was done. And the scale said it weighed 39 pounds, so I double checked on another one and it said the same thing. It's really hard to throw and officially impossible to make a basket with now, but I can stand on it, kinda. Like if you think I should keep going.